Thank you for joining us for another PPM Insights webcast from Enterprise Studio. In this session, we have a great how-to to get you started with building Clarity PPM reports using Jaspersoft Studio. Once you see these practical how-tos in action, you're going to see how easy it can be to build more sophisticated and really more enhanced reports. Our featured expert for this session is Linda Ray. She's a senior services architect with Enterprise Studio and an in-demand business intelligence expert. I think some of you may be familiar with her work. We all know the power of business intelligence, and Linda knows how to knock down those barriers and misconceptions when creating tools for using it and interpreting it. So her balance of technical skills and business acumen is one of the reasons why we invited her to join us today. You might have attended one of her sessions in the past at one of the user conferences where she's been a speaker, or at one of our business intelligence sessions at industry events. So she's conducted a lot of these training sessions. She's traveled extensively for adoption assistance, and we're just so fortunate to have her here today. So here's what we're going to be covering. The demo that Linda is going to be going through includes learning Jaspersoft Studio interface, understanding the sections, and bringing it all together to build your own reports. The key takeaways will include some next steps that you can apply immediately to get more out of your business intelligence. And the presentation will also be made available to you so you can reference the screenshots from the live demo that Linda is going to start here in a minute. If you have questions along the way, you can enter them in the chat section, and we will answer those during the Q&A section at the end. So let's go ahead and get started.
Awesome. Thanks, Lisa. Let's get this going. So as mentioned by Lisa, today I will cover the Jaspersoft Studio interface in going through details behind the report views that are available, as well as the explorers. And we'll walk through the various sections as well that can be leveraged during the design process. So let's get into it. The supporting explorers that are available within Jaspersoft Studio are your repository explorer, the project explorer, the report state, and the problems. There are additional views that are more so used during the development process. So you have your canvas view, the outline, the palette, and the properties. In the handout that Lisa mentioned, we'll have detailed slides that will actually walk you through the key points that I'll cover during the demo today, so that you don't have to continuously review the demo to understand what those items are. But I won't go through the presentation. I'd like to just use the tool to more so cover that content. During the demo, I'll display two reports. One report will focus on the report sections, whereas you do not have groupings, and it's just simply how the layout comes when you're building a new report. So I'll talk through the sections, where they're placed on the report, and how they're displayed. After walking through the report sections that are available, I'll then speak through the groupings and how groupings are used within the tool. Once we finish this piece, what I'll do is, as long as we have enough time, which we should, I'll create a new report and we'll walk through the process. What I will not cover today really is how to create a data connection, but I'll show you where you can find that information. Okay. So within the Jaspersoft Studio tool, I currently have the sections report open that I just mentioned. So this is the canvas area, and I'll cover that in a moment. But to start off, I'd like to cover the various views that are available. You have your repository explorer, and your repository explorer has this red symbol, and it's really made so that you can connect to content, whether it be a data adapter or a server connection. The data adapter is more so the source of where you're sourcing your data from. And data adapters can be an Excel spreadsheet, as you can see here, or it can be a connection to the data warehouse for Clarity PPM or the transaction system. Within the DocOps site, and I do have it open here, there is a link that walks you through how you can download Jaspersoft Studio, as well as the adapters, and it gives you great details in regards to setting up the adapters so that you can connect to both the data warehouse database as well as the PPM database. Once you have this information configured, you would have the options to connect your SQL queries to build your report. So this data adapter section is the key to building reports. The server section below here is more so to allow you to access the repository information that's accessible within advanced reporting. So while you're within the Clarity PPM application, when you click on advanced reporting, you save content in a folder structure. And that folder structure can be pulled into Jaspersoft Studio so that you can not only pull content down to your local machine, but you can also push content up into the application to be reviewed by others. The Project Explorer view is more so of a local resource. This accesses your Jaspersoft workspace, which is a folder that's created by Jaspersoft Studio to contain all of the content that you're working on. So you can separate content by projects, or you can separate content by folders. And we'll, in another session, go through the project option versus the folders. It's more of an advanced topic. However, when you save content on your local machine, once you save the content within your Jaspersoft Studio workspace, you'll be able to access the content here. So you can open and close content, you can save, update the file names, etc. It's a very helpful tool so that you're not constantly going to the File and Open option on the main menu. No. The report state section in the bottom of the screen is more so of an information section. So it tells you how fast the report's compiling, the filing time, the execution time, the total number of pages. And when you do export the content, it will also give you the export time. So that it more so helps you when you're working on like your performance issues and so forth. You don't necessarily have to deploy it into the system as yet. So you'll have like your preliminary performance content available within the report state section. Now, the problems view. The problems view is available to really give you information on content that's stored within your Jaspersoft workspace. So if you save 10 reports within your Jaspersoft workspace and there's an issue in connecting to a repository item, whether it's an image or if it's a connection or a template file, the errors will display in the problem section. So it really gives you a heads up if there are errors or warnings, or if there are any random other items that it just needs to let you know that there's content you need to look at. And then it gives you details in regards to where you can look. So those are like more so the supporting views that are available within the tool, but certainly helpful to understand where they are and how they're used. Now, in some instances, you may not see the views when you open Jaspersoft Studio, and if you don't see the views, the way in which you're able to access those views is by going to your main menu bar and you click on the window option. When you click on window option, you can go to show view and other. Once you select other, it will open an information window and you can navigate through the content that's available here. The items that I've covered, for the most part, they're all under general. So you can see you have outline, palette, problems, Project Explorer, and so forth. Okay, the repository is under the Jaspersoft Studio. Now, those are like really your supporting views. So now I'll walk through the views that you will use during the development process. Okay, now the canvas, this is really the key. This is where you're able to drag and drop content, and we'll talk through where you can drag content and where you can review the content that you are placing in the canvas. But this is the area where you're defining the layout and the formatting, and you actually create your sections and so forth. There are 3 tabs that are tied to the canvas view: your design view, is the view where you can see your sections and you have the ability to modify content in a visual reference. And then you have your source tab. The source tab allows you to use XML. So those of you that are familiar with XML and you love XML, it really will be an exciting ad for you. I've seen some resources would simply just kind of copy and paste tags and modify the tags. The source is also very helpful for if you need to modify many items in bulk. And let's say, for instance, they're all in the same section, you can navigate through your XML source and just change the text simply here versus going through the design view and reselecting text boxes. So the source view is certainly one of my favorite areas. The preview tab is where you're able to sample what the content will look like. And on the preview tab, you have the ability to change the type of output that you're expecting to see. It defaults to Java, but you can also change it to HTML, which would be how it would look when it's deployed on the server. You can also change it to PDF, so you can change it to different formats just to see how it will look during the design process. Okay, and so I'll go back to Java. You can also navigate through the pages. You can actually magnify by zooming in and zooming out. You have the ability to also export the content if you'd like to see how the export will be accounted for once you've developed the content and placed it out on the server as well. Now, the section here to the left is the connection that you're using. So if you create many connections, whereas we spoke on within the repository explorer, you have your data adapters. So let's say, for instance, you have like your dev instance, your test instance, and your production instance. You may have 3 different connections for your data adapters. So as you're going through the development, you may want to test the data within the different environments, especially if you have custom attributes in your code. So you would change that item here. Now back to the design view. On the top of the design view, you have a few options available at the top. The first option is the compile report option, whereas as you're developing the report, if you make certain changes, you can certainly compile the report to make sure there are no error messages. Also, the compile report button is helpful if you are developing a report and let's say, for instance, when you're previewing the content, it's not showing you the latest content that you expect. You would then compile the report again, and what it does is it creates a file, like a cached file on your local machine. And so it will refresh that cached file to ensure that you're looking at the latest information that's available. The second tab here is a tab that takes you to your data set and query dialog section. This is where you're able to enter your SQL code. And you can also create parameters here. You can sort content, you can filter content, and you can preview the data as you're writing your SQL code as well. This is one of my favorite features. In the newer releases, they've also added a drop-down where you can get fields and refresh data on the preview tab. So those of you that have used Jaspersoft Studio before, this feature is really great because you don't have to come up and click read field. So we'll talk through that in a moment. But it does allow you to update your column references within the preview tab now. Okay, so we'll come out of this piece. And so that's really the bulk of the Canvas area. The only 2 items that I would say that we'll cover in greater detail will be the publish report in another session. This is so that you're able to push the report up into the repository so that users can access the content that you've built. So it would display within advanced reporting, or if you configure the reports to be displayed in reports and jobs, this is how you're getting it onto the server. On the settings option, one cool item to note would be that if you click on the drop down to the right of settings, you can actually change the data adapter pretty quickly in regards to how you would like to connect the report when you're in preview tab or when you're using the data query editor that I just covered. So that's the Canvas area. And the outline view goes hand in hand with the canvas. The outline view, I'd say, really is like your best friend. If nothing else, you'll probably remember the outline, because it's my favorite location, I guess. Within the outline, you have the ability to label the report. And so when you click on the sections area, and I'll cover the properties section in greater detail in a moment, but when you click on the highest level that you see in the outline, it actually allows you to give the report a name. And this is not the name of the file, and that's often a misconception. This is actually the name of the report that you would like to have when you're exporting content in Excel, etc. This report name value will be placed on the worksheet tab. Okay, so it's separate from the report file name. It also kind of gives a hint when you're saving the report locally, or when you're saving the report to advanced reporting, when you're publishing it, it also kind of assumes that this would be the report name that you would like to have. Underneath the report name, you then see styles. Styles is the area where you're able to create formatting conditions. So you have conditional formatting. If value X is equal to 5, then make the font red and make a border, things like that. You can also associate template files under the style section, and we'll cover that in a more advanced class as well. But the styles is really focused on the formatting that's available, and it allows you to format in bulk. So it's a really helpful tool to use once you become familiar with it. The parameters section, you're able to create parameters in the outline view as well as in the query editor, as I mentioned a moment ago. Parameters are used to change content within your queries. They're also used to make reports dynamic. I've used parameters for all sorts of fun features. The ones that you're seeing currently in gray, those are the out-of-the-box shipped parameters, and they can all be used at any point in time, even though they're gray. They're gray because they're out of the box. The field section shows any fields that you have defined in your SQL query. So within the query, the column names will be displayed as field values. If you say as and you give it an alias name, the alias name will display in the field name section in the section below here. Okay. I'll touch on that now. When you are writing your SQL queries, it is important that you note that if you modify your SQL query at any point in time, and let's say you were to add an additional column, you would then need to click on your Read Fields button. When you click on the Read Fields button, what it does is it will place that new field in the section below so that it can be accessible within the report. Okay, so that's how it would add it under the field sections here so that you can drag it into the report canvas. Sort fields is an area where you can sort content within the report without using the SQL code to sort the content. I haven't used sort fields here very often, but I have used it occasionally, whereas we may have different sections, and depending on the layout, you may want to create a sort field here. And you're just leveraging the fields that you've returned from your SQL query, and you can define another sort order. The variable section here allows you to create aggregations. If you want totals within different summary areas, etc., that's where your variables come into play. And as the same with the parameters, the gray text really just means that it's out of the box variables that are created that you can leverage at any point in time. The scriptlets area is an advanced feature where you're able to write Java code, and you can do a lot of really fun things with scriptlets. I'll cover that like in another session, but your report scriptlets area just allows you to create dynamic content within the report output. And in some cases, I've seen it as to where your scriptlets can give you more of a visualization effect versus like the flat report output. Okay, great. So now we'll shift into the sections area. As I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, within the tool, and you're looking at the canvas, it's really important to understand the various sections that are available and how you can place content to be not only displayed within the application, but also exported in a meaningful way, right? So by all means, you can have a SQL query written. You can also add groupings, etc. But if you don't understand the section's placement, it can often be an issue, especially when you begin to add more complicated layouts with subreports and cross tabs and charts and etc. So I really wanted to walk through the different sections and where they're placed within the canvas. So the first area that you're seeing on the canvas is your title section. The title section is only displayed once on the report. It's displayed at the beginning. By default, you will see the title displayed at the top of the first page. But when looking at the properties of the report, there's also an option to make it as to where the title on a page is selected. When you select this option, what it does is it provides an entire first page for that title section. So you essentially have a report page where you can just have one page with your title content. And then every following page would then have the page header, column, detail, and footer, okay? Keep in mind when you do use the title page as to where it's separate, you will not see the page header and footer. And that's why on the page header section, I have it noted that the page header is on most pages. It will not be displayed on the title page if you separate the title page or if you separate the summary page. So I'll drop to the bottom. The summary page is essentially the same as the title, but it's at the end of the report. By default, it will also show as the last section on the last page of the report, but you can also select an option to have it on a new page. So you would have one page at the end. I've often seen customers use that summary page to provide details on parameters that they've selected, things like that, or like a really big chart. So the summary page does come in handy at times where you're not using like your grand total. In some cases, they'll have just a grand total on the summary section and not make it an entire page. So with your page header and your page footer, you can see those will display as you would expect at the top and the bottom of every page. And then you have your column header and your column footer. Many people that use other reporting tools, they're usually curious of what a column header and column footer is. It's somewhat specific to Jaspersoft Studio. The way in which it's used is that the column header and footer, they show inside of the page header, kind of how they're shown here. And I'll show preview so that you can see it. So the column header and the column footer, they provide you another way to capture content somewhat on a page basis without leveraging the page header and the page footer. So if you wanted to have like a running total at the bottom of each page, you would generally place that in your column footer. And we'll cover groupings and how it's placed there as well in a moment. But you can see all of your detailed rows will show inside of the column header and the column footer. In this current example, the column footer is placed as to where it's attached to the page footer. So it's the bottom of the page. So as you get to like your last page, you can see the column footer stays static at the bottom. One really good item to note is that you can change that by looking at the properties of the report. And the way you do that is by clicking on the gray space. You'll see the properties window, and I'll touch on the properties in a moment. Or you can right click the report name and you can actually say show properties and it will show you the section. If you select the float column footer checkbox over here to the right, what that does is that makes it as to where the column footer is no longer attached to the page footer at the bottom of the page. It will actually shift up so that it's more so attached to the content that's available within the report. So you can see here, you have your detailed rows, you have your summary once at the end of the report, and your column footer is always placed right inside of the page footer. So it's important that you note that when you are placing content into the report. Now, the detailed section, okay, one more thing on the column. The column section also allow you to have multiple columns in an output. So let's say, for instance, you were creating a report which similar to this, which it only has 3 columns here. If you wanted to use the entire page and not waste the real estate to the right, what you can do is you can, when you go to your edit page format, you would say that you want 2 columns to be available on the report. And you can see what it does is it splits the canvas into 2 different areas, and it treats each of these sections as a separate page. So with that being the case, you would have let me scroll down. You would have your headers, which would be investment key and cost on the left side, and then it would go all the way down. When it runs out of space for the rows, it will then come to the second side of the page, and it will then start again with investment key cost, and it will continue down on the second side. I haven't seen this feature used very often, but I have used it, and it's pretty helpful for saving real estate for reports that don't have many columns going across. And then into the detailed section really just shows it shows all of the rows that are to be returned from the query that you've defined in your dataset editor. So if you run the dataset query and you have 50 rows, you'll have 50 detailed rows that would display here. And so I'll just show the sections area again. So as you can see, you have the title section once in the beginning. You have your page header, the column header, column footer. They go within the page header, page footer sections, and then you have your detailed rows. Now, when you are building reports, we often have subtotals that we need to account for. When we're looking for subtotals, that's where we need to add groups. And in adding groups, you have the ability to add a group header and you can add a group footer, okay? So this sample report here shows you the placement of your group header and your group footer within the report. Now, I intentionally have the cost set to 0 and so forth because I wanted to focus on the layout, not so much the data. But you can see that in the group header section, you can certainly show the name of a value. This could be your manager name. It could be the investment name. It could be any dimension that's available within the system. Excuse me. And then the group footer section is generally used for summarizations. So in a future session, we'll cover the difference between adding a summary in the group footer versus adding a summary in the group header. There is a difference in how it needs to be calculated, and it's tied to, and I'll give you a quick hint if you do get started before that session, it's tied to how the variable is processing. So you need to look at the evaluation time here, okay? And you would want to set it to the group that you're running it for. So that's just a quick hint in advance. So that's really the section layouts that are available within Jaspersoft Studio. And then I'd like to talk you through the palette. So the palette is the area where you have the ability to drag and drop content into the canvas to create a report. So what I'll do now is I will create a new report. So we'll say File, New, Jasper Report. And here we're able to select the type of report layout that we'd like to have. A blank letter is essentially saying you want a regular size paper, which is the letter size, and you like for it to be portrait. You can also do blank letter landscape, which means you're using letter paper that's in landscape mode. Say next. This is where it's asking you to provide a name to the file. So I'll label this demo sample, and I'm saving it at the highest level in my Jaspersoft workspace. This option is asking which data adapter to use. So if you're writing a query against the data warehouse, you would want to select the data adapter that you created within your repository explorer that would map to your data warehouse. Okay. If you're using your transactional system, you should have a separate data connection. So I'll select the DWH dev instance that I have. And right now what it's doing is it's making certain that it can connect to the database, and it's pulling back any metadata that's available. So let me scroll down. Within the metadata section, it shows you which connection you're actually connected to. And as a SaaS customer, it's definitely helpful because you'll see a lot of references. When you select the drop-down arrow, you're then able to see the metadata associated with your connection. You can see all of the tables. You can see the columns that are available. Let me drag over a little bit. You can see the columns that are available per table. A really nice feature that they do have is that within your query editor, you do have your text, your outline, and your diagram section. The text is generally where you'll just write your SQL code if you're familiar with SQL and you're just comfortable with freehand. If you're not completely comfortable with writing freehand, they also have like the outline view, which gives you like a little support. So if you wanted to, you can actually just drag content in, and it will, if you drag over a column name, it places the table that's referenced there. You still do need to understand associations. There's a diagram tab as well. Whereas if you have joins, and if your SQL is basic enough, it will actually show you not only the tables and the columns, but it will show you the relationships between the various tables. If your SQL becomes complicated, it will no longer show you the associations because it can't necessarily make the references. For now, what I'll do is I'll just create this report by clicking Finish without having the SQL accounted for there. Okay, so this is like an empty report. This is just getting started. And so I just want to show you guys how simple it can be to create a report. The main thing, as I mentioned, would be gathering the SQL code. And so I'll just use the SQL code that I have in this section's report. It's pretty basic, but it supports the purpose of the session today. And so I've just copied the SQL code from that section's JRML report, JRXML. And you can see I'm connected to a data source, and let me scroll that over. All right, good deal. And so here you can see I have the SQL code accounted for. And when I click on read fields, what that does is it will actually run the query against this data connection, and it will have the field names, the type, and so forth accounted for in this section. So right now we're only pulling back your investment key, your allocation cost, and the investment manager key. If I click on the data preview tab, as I mentioned earlier, you can actually click on refresh preview data, and this is where you can see your sample data output. Okay. I'll click OK. And then here we are with an empty canvas, and we have the content available to drag and drop. We have fields where you have the fields that we've just selected. And one neat trick is that if you are building a report and the report simply just needs to have columns going across, you can highlight all of the fields that you have. And once you pull it into the canvas area, you can see it just separates them based on the spacing. If you double click on any white space within a section area, it will collapse and it will make the content fit. So you can see as we click on the preview, the content is in a column fashion, okay? Now, the palette area, as I mentioned a moment ago, you have different items that you can add. You have your text fields, which are dynamic, and you can change the content based on parameters, based on various variables, etc. Static text, is not changed. When you drag content over from your fields into the detail, any boxes that are placed in the column header will be static text. They do not allow you to do anything fancy. You cannot add any sort of dynamic content. All you're able to do really with that is just change the formatting and change the text, as you can see here. Text boxes, you can just place any sort of content that you'd like. As I mentioned, you can use variables, you can use parameters, you can use a lot of different features here. Okay. Within the palette, you have the ability to bring in an image. So as you can see in the samples that I have before, I have an image of our logo, and I have it safe within our workspace. You're able to pull it in from the workspace, which would be your My Reports folder. An absolute path, you can actually reference a URL. There are different options. Generally, in developing a report, I usually just use a workspace reference to get started. And when I'm preparing to deploy the report, then I would change the reference. But we'll cover that piece in greater detail in a more advanced session. So as you can see, it was pretty simple to add an image to the report. To add a title, you just drag and drop the text, and this is very close to what is available in the sections report. Now, a nice item to note is that you can copy content from different reports, and you can actually paste them, and it comes over the same. And this is really just to get started in understanding where content is placed and how you're able to modify content within the development process. So the last thing I'll show during the demo will be the Properties tab. The Properties tab is where you have the ability to change your formatting. You can change the borders. So you can see within the sections report that I have as a sample, and we'll be sure to make these available for you as well. You can change the border formatting. You can change the font, the style in the properties area. You can change the background, the placement using pixels, and you can change whether it will stretch or it will collapse or if it will actually hold still. So this is just a get starting session. We do plan to have additional sessions in the future, which will cover most of these topics in greater detail, and will be more advanced with adding crosstabs, subreports, charts, and put you in a good position to build some complex reports. With that being said, the key takeaways for today's session would be for you to keep in mind that the outline view is your best friend. I'll go back one more time because I do want to show you. When you're in the outline view, you can select an area. It helps you find content. You can create additional sections. You can move content around. The outline view allows you to navigate through a complicated report very easily. If you want to add additional sections, you can right-click a content and you can say add detail. The outline section really is the powerhouse, but we'll cover that in greater detail. But if you do get started before the next session, please play around with the right-click options that are available here, and the right-click options that are available when you highlight content. I'll just show quickly. I'm having a moment where you can actually order content. You can align content to other items within a section, or you can specifically align content to the container section itself. So those are a few items that you definitely would want to take as a takeaway. Understand the section placement within the report design and output. That's really like when you begin to add charts and subreports and crosstabs. It's very important that you understand the placement and where it will show in the report and how it will render. The source XML, as I mentioned, it can be used to modify multiple items swiftly. So if you want to change header titles, or you want to change content with a variable name, etc., the source XML is a great place to go. Your Project Explorer, as I mentioned, it's very useful to access that local content. And then the last item would be, your text fields. Leverage text fields. When you create a report, if you would like to use dynamic content, it's okay to take that static label out of your column header and place a text field there. You'll have the ability to perhaps use like a parameter to change that content, etc. And then let me. And the last item that I would like to note is that really the goal is to turn data into information and information into insight. And I'll hand it back over to Lisa.
Great, thanks, Linda. At this point, if you have any questions for Linda, you can enter them in the chat section. And if you have questions afterwards, you can always email us at enterprisestudio@hcl.com. So give people a minute to get any questions entered. And Linda, this looks like it's a great foundation for some of the more advanced reporting topics that you're going to cover down the road for us. So can you just give us a little bit of a hint? I think you did earlier on maybe 2 or 3 of the top things that would be valuable in our next webinar.
Yeah, sure, Lisa. So I often have questions around charts. Many customers have issues with getting started with charts and chart formatting and how complicated charts can be. So we'll definitely talk through groupings, grouping content, placing charts or subreports in the appropriate sections to be rendered, and how they can be processed. And then we'll cover definitely how you can format charts in a more dynamic way. So those will probably be the next 2 sessions that we'll plan to have.
Great. Well, we will be looking forward to those. It's Linda, it's always great to have you as our guest expert. And I appreciate you sharing so many of the practical how-tos around using Jaspersoft Studio. So we're definitely going to look forward to having you back soon and take this to more advanced levels. So to our participants, we want to say thank you for joining this webcast from Enterprise Studio. If you do have additional questions or comments, or if you want to learn more about Enterprise Studio, who's the global preferred partner for services, training, and education for Broadcom Solutions, you can contact us at enterprisestudio.com. And thank you for spending part of your day with us today.